Good afternoon. Hi. So my name is Erin Von Jones, and I am the Ombuds for UMC. So I'm just going to go over a short presentation that shares a little bit about the office, the history of the position, etc. So, a little bit about me. As I said, my name is Erin Von Jones, and I am originally from Clarksdale, Mississippi. I attended the University of Southern Mississippi to the top, where I studied English. So, I double majored in English and athletic training, thinking I wanted to do either one of those things. But as I really got into both subjects, I was at a crossroads. So I really decided to drop athletic training and really focus on English. Both of my parents are educators, so it just made sense that I also be an educator just like them. After I finished at USM, I decided to attend the University of Central Arkansas. So I'd really fallen in love with the college experience and really helping students through their transitions in college. So I studied college student personnel and administration at the University of Central Arkansas and accepted my first position at LSU in Baton Rouge, where I worked in student affairs and student housing. So I really enjoyed my time working at LSU. I worked there for 6 years, and it was there I decided to pursue a PhD in higher ed because I really felt like it was a calling for me. And so I got my PhD in educational leadership, research, and counseling, and I studied specifically burnout, altruism, and wellness outcomes of live in and live on residence lifestyle. So in 2014, my father passed, and that kind of drew me back to Mississippi. So I started working at Jackson State, where I was in student affairs, and then moved to Hines and worked in and outside of student affairs. And then one night, I saw a position. I was just mindlessly scrolling, and it was for an ombuds position here at UMC. I felt like because of my conflict resolution background and all those things, I would be a great ombuds, and so that's what really led me to apply for the position. So I've been here since November 27th in the role, and I've really had an opportunity to connect with some awesome faculty, staff, and students. So I'm just excited about the opportunities really presented here at UMC. So some historical perspective on the position. King Charles XII is really credited with appointing the very first ombudsman in the 1700s. So in 1709, King Charles was forced to flee to Turkey after Russia defeated Sweden. There he really came to know the Turkish office of the Chief Justice, which ensured that officials followed Islamic law. This inspired him to really create a similar office to ensure that Swedish officials follow the law and fulfill their own obligations. The term was derived from the medieval Germanic tribes, which really applies the term itself to a third party whose task it was to collect fines from culprit families and distribute those fines to the aggrieved families. So ombuds were introduced in America in the 1960s, really under the Richard Nixon administration. And so, of course, during his administration, there was a lot of civil unrest, if you kind of keep up with history at that time. And so faculty typically handled everything that occurred in an institution. So some of you all may have heard of what's called in loco parentis, which literally means in place of the parent. And so under Nixon's administration, he appointed what's called a commission on campus unrest. One of the recommendations from that committee was to utilize what was called the Ombuds method as a way to really solve some of the problems that faculty, staff, and students were experiencing in higher education at the time. The AAMC also emphasizes the importance of really creating this safe, inclusive space for academic medicine and advocates for mechanisms to really resolve conflicts and protect individuals from harassment, retaliation, and power imbalances that exist. So utilizing an ombuds really creates a safer and more inclusive culture for faculty, staff, and our learners in general. So common terms used to describe persons that do ombuds work is ombudsperson, ombudsman, or ombuds. I'm referred to here at UMC as an ombudsperson, but I do consider myself just as ombuds because ombudsman is just not as gender inclusive. So key responsibilities of an ombuds. This first paragraph that's up here, if you were to go on the intranet where our website is or where the webpage is, this first paragraph is there. Committed to promoting a fair and respectful environment, the Ombuds serves as an independent, confidential, and neutral resource for students, residents, faculty, and staff at UMC. Whether there are concerns about academic issues, conflicts with peers and faculty, or a confidential ear is needed, the Ombuds is here to help. The Ombuds is a safe space for open dialogue, conflict resolution, and guidance, fostering a positive and inclusive campus community. When you think about Ombuds work, there are really 4 pillars that really compose this Ombuds work. The first one is independence. Independence really is the foundation for starting really any ombuds office. Part of the rationale for really establishing and supporting an ombuds office is to counter visitors' fears of retaliation for bringing forward issues. As I go through this presentation today, you are going to hear me use the word visitors. You won't hear me use the word client. Client implies a fiduciary relationship. You also will not hear me use the word patient. So this office does not serve patients here at UMC. This office does serve all of the missions here at UMC and reports directly to the Vice Chancellor's office to Doctors Rutledge and Woodward. The goal of really visiting an ombuds is to determine the options to consider to best address the situation. The next pillar in ombuds work is impartiality. If independence is the foundation, impartiality really is the architectural archway that allows individuals to visit. This impartiality also favors all sides equally. As the ombuds, it's not my job to determine who's right or who's wrong in a situation. During the inquiries, I act without bias or conflict of interest. This is another reason that this office reports directly to the Vice Chancellor's office. The office does not advocate for a visitor or a particular party, but does advocate for a fair and transparent process. The third pillar is confidentiality. If foundation is independence, the entranceway is impartiality, confidentiality is the door that shields sources, identities, and communications really from the rest of the institution. This separates ombuds from other offices that receive complaints and investigate them. Confidentiality also promotes disclosure from reluctant complainants, elicits candid discussions by all parties, and provides really an increased level of protection against retaliation to or by any party. As an ombuds, I do not disclose confidential information unless there is imminent risk or serious harm. If I feel like someone has said something that lends me to believe there is imminent risk or serious harm, I will directly ask that person and they won't have to do any guessing here. Also, as an ombuds, I do not record anything that occurs during the meeting. I do take notes whenever some situations are especially complex, but they are shredded within 30 days unless a visitor asks me to. In July, Dr. Woodward came out with one of her Friday VC notes. And one of the things she shared in that was that my shredder was in the corner of my office. It was. I've done some redecorating, so if you were to ever come in there and look for that shredder, it has moved from the corner of my office to under my desk. I also encourage visitors to not share any sensitive or confidential information communicated via email or voicemail. So if you look down here, kind of this last statement, the Office of the Ombuds at UMC practices in accordance with the International Ombudsman Association Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. That is on every email that I send from my Ombuds email as well as my ejones16@umc.edu email. The only information I will not keep confidential is if someone is sharing something that lends me to believe there is imminent harm or danger or self to others or harm to others. I also want to let everyone know that communication with the ombuds is not a first step, nor is it any step in the formal complaint process to UMC. There are some times when visitors share with me that they either want to utilize a formal complaint process or they're considering taking legal action, which employees and students absolutely have the right to do. But sharing that information with me will not trigger any sort of response in me that will cause me to share that information with anyone else. The Ombuds is not an official agent to really receive that notice for the organization. There are 5 types of ombuds. There are classical ombuds. Classical ombuds typically investigate complaints. They can actually render formal decisions. These are typically in governmental organizations. There are executive ombuds, which really serve executive leadership only. There are advocate ombuds, which are typical in healthcare organizations and nursing homes. Advocate ombuds really advocate for the people that they serve, and typically those are patients and those they are advocating for patient needs. There are hybrid ombuds, which do a combination of activities in the ombud's role. And then there are organizational ombuds. So here at UMC, I'm an organizational ombud. So I serve members of the organization. I do think it's important to note that students and persons affiliated with the School of Pharmacy are filtered to Paul, who is the ombuds at Ole Miss. So if a visitor ever comes and they are from the School of Pharmacy, I will work with that person to get them in contact with Paul as appropriate. The International Ombuds Association has taken kind of the first 3 pillars I talked about, the independence, impartiality, and confidentiality, as the pillars, but they have really added a 4th pillar that's unique to organizational ombuds, and that is the informality piece. So as an organizational ombud, I can work in the public or private sector, and really an organizational ombuds works to address issues brought forth by members of its organization regarding a policy or practice. The leading Ombuds Association recognizes that informality is a vital component in the standards of organizational ombuds practice. This means that as an ombud, I cannot participate in any formal adjudicative or administrative process related to any concerns brought forth to the office's attention. Meeting with the ombuds is strictly off the record. So as an ombud, I'm not a part of the formal grievance process. It's not an office to receive notice. And I cannot direct an office to edit or change a grade or make a change in a formal decision. However, if a visitor is involved in a formal process, I can work with that visitor to offer tips and techniques to best help them self-advocate throughout that process. So the ombuds impact in academic health. First, navigating complex interpersonal dynamics with communication and collaboration between healthcare professionals really intertwined with interprofessional care and education. Interactions between students, residents, and fellows, faculty, and staff really create opportunities for conflict. When we think about conflict, what comes to mind? How would someone in here define conflict? Disagreement. Adversarial, okay, can be adversarial, awesome, thank you. So conflict is really a state of emotional discord caused by actual or perceived opposition of needs, values, and interests between 2 or more individuals. When we think about the type of conflict that can exist in an organization, there are 4 types. First, that personality conflict. So persons really just don't get along. Their value systems are completely different. And it's really, that conflict is really keeping us from moving forward the mission here at UMC. Task incompatibility. Sometimes we get in roles and we expect that we know what we're supposed to do, but we get in the job and we realize this is something else altogether than what I signed up for. Or sometimes our jobs can evolve over time and we've got more on our plate than what we've expected. Information deficiencies. How many of us have ever had to make a decision and we haven't known all the information? And knowing that last or critical piece of information may have meant that we would have done something a different way. And lastly, the environmental stresses of just working at an organization altogether. This includes resource allocation, our office culture, our physical space, and cultural norms. Promoting a healthy work environment. Academic healthcare can be stressful, and unresolved conflicts surrounding work can really lead to negativity and irritability. It can also lead to burnout, antisocial behavior, retaliation, team dysfunction, and violence. Unresolved conflict also leads to high levels of absenteeism, but also presenteeism. So just being at work, don't raise your hand. I'm gonna ask you this question. How many of us have ever gone to work before and just felt like, I'm just here. I'm just here today. I hear the expression riding the clock. That is what that presenteeism means. The Ombuds office really provides a confidential and safe space in which to really unpack that conflict, gain new perspectives and strategies to move forward to manage conflict productively. Preventing the escalation of conflict. Managers spend between 20 and 60% of their time working to settle disputes. This is outside of their normal everyday tasks that is expected out of them. Ombuds can really serve as that early intervention mechanism to really help resolve disputes before they turn into formal complaints or really lead to legal actions. Poorly managed conflicts are the largest reducible cost in an organization. Last, confidential consultations, conflict resolution, and mediation. Ombuds are really able to provide visitors with impartial feedback, strategies for resolving their problem, and are often trained mediators to help de-escalate tense and high-stress situations. I'm also a mediator, so if ever there's conflict where two parties do want to get together and really talk about how to work through that conflict, I'm absolutely here and happy to help in that process. So utilizing the Ombuds. As I've been here at UMC, one of the questions I typically get is, how do we know when to send someone to you versus to send them to human resources versus to send them to well-being or some other formal channel? You can really send anyone to the Ombuds at any time. So whether it's a concern with harassment, fear of confrontation, unsure of where to go and what to do, unsure of what policies or procedures that are specific to the concern, would like to discuss a specific issue. As an Ombuds, I'm also here to serve as a bridge. So it is my job to help connect people to other resources that they may not be aware of. So a visit to the Ombuds, what does it look like? So typically, most people who want to see me as the Ombuds, they will email me at ombuds@umc.edu. And the messages all say the same thing. I want to see you right now. I have a problem that cannot wait. As an ombuds, it is in both the party's best interest, it is in our best interest to wait anywhere between 24 and 72 hours. I just get a more productive conversation with the visitor, and visitors have even noted, you know what, Dr. Jones, thank you so much. I'm so glad that we didn't meet when I initially wanted to meet, because it's given them some time to kind of think about the concern and come to the meeting with the productive mind. But they're typically scheduled between 24 and 72 hours in advance. If there are some time constraints that I need to be made aware of, sometimes when I'm thinking of, you may have a certain amount of time to respond to a concern. Students that are going through the appeals process have a certain window in which they can appeal. So if there's some sort of time constraint where I need to work in someone sooner, I absolutely will. The first step really in coming into the ombuds office is really this listening here. And the visitor actually is the first person who does some listening. And so I talk about kind of the four pillars that I spoke about earlier and really answer any questions that they have and letting the visitor know the things that I can and cannot do. I also learned the situation here. So I do a lot of listening in this phase. This is the phase for visitors that they find very therapeutic and helpful because for some people, it is the first time that they have felt safe enough to express their concern or the first time they felt like someone was truly listening to their concern. Um, it's also during this stage where I ask clarifying questions to ensure that I understand their concern as they have shared it. Kind of the second phase of the meeting after the visitor has gotten their concern out is to really assess the goals. So sometimes visitors come in with specific wants. You know, I want the institution to do this, or I want this person to be gone, or whatever their want is. Um, and so I listen in that information gathering stage as well. But it's also time for me to share, is there a policy or procedure that if you knew that this exists, would it impact kind of your want or your concern at that point? Sometimes visitors also request and require information about policies, procedures, and sources of information. The heavy lifting by the ombuds is also done at this stage, particularly if the concern is with another employee versus a policy or concern. You know, policy issues, I can pull a policy. We'll talk about that policy. If I need to talk to the policy steward to get more information, I can do that. But for persons who are struggling with another person, that's really where some of that heavy lifting is done. It's also at the assessing goals stage where visitors decide what they want to do next. In the meeting, we will talk about pros and cons of acting or not acting. And so a person could act in a variety of ways pending their situation, and the visitor may choose to share something learned in the ombuds meeting to move forward. They may choose not to do that. They may leave the issue alone altogether. The last step really is this taking appropriate action. So this is providing assistance where needed. Sometimes that means I conduct an intervention on behalf of the visitor, whether that is a request for a mediation, whether that is talking to another party and finding information to provide more clarity to them. And sometimes that even means taking issues forward without sharing confidential information about the visitor or visitors who have shared their complaint. So things the Ombuds office can do. Really be an early resolution before the other party is aware that there's a conflict and before relationships are really severely affected. I really appreciate this stage. There have been so many managers who have come in because they've seen issues and concerns brewing among people and they want to fix those as soon as possible before the situation escalates. It's a safe space to address the emotional, relationship, and ethical concerns. So in my office, I typically get people who express their frustration through tears. They apologize for that. You don't ever have to apologize for coming to the ombuds office to cry and really be frustrated. For a lot of visitors, that is really the first step in getting it out before we can move on to resolve the conflict. Sometimes visitors say things in a meeting with me that they may not say to their manager because they're not professional or they're inappropriate to say. My office is also a safe space for that as well. It also serves to protect your anonymity. Specific ways that I've provided some assistance to visitors includes responding to correspondence. So there are visitors who want me to review everything from emails to appeals to anything that they have to send up to an upline manager or supervisor. I'm happy to review those. Mediating conversations between people if both parties agree. I will not move forward with a mediation unless both parties agree to come to the table to have that conversation. Providing shuttle diplomacy. So this means that, I speak with one visitor in the office and they want me to share their concern with someone else because they don't feel comfortable engaging with that leader or that person face to face. So I do that for them. Offering clarity on policies and procedures, and also referring to the appropriate office should someone wish to file a formal complaint. The office also provides coaching on how to resolve their issue, recommending changes to policies and procedures that appear outdated or problematic. And if I recommend any sort of changes, this does not mean that the office has to take that recommendation, but obviously I do want to share trends that are emerging in my office just so that the leader or manager can be aware that the situation is persisting. Also, advocating for a fair and equitable application of procedures and policies, and informing UMMC leadership about patterns of complaints or problems that seem to be systemic. The next couple of slides are going to really target the visits that have occurred really since the office has been open. And so, like I said, I've been here since November 27th, so it'll be a year next month. It does not seem like it has been, it seems like time is just flying. But my first 3 months, I really spent a lot of time really learning about the organization, meeting with various leaders, going to faculty meetings, staff meetings, et cetera, sharing a little bit about what the office is, working on various certifications, so we can be ready to rock and roll. So the first visitor came to the office February of 2024. So information in this and subsequent slides is current to October 14th. It is important to note that once the office opened, originally it was for students. So most of my experience, as I shared earlier, have been in student affairs. But what I noticed is once the office was open, people kept coming, whether they were students or not. So after talking with Dr. Rutledge and Dr. Woodward, it was determined that, hey, that this office be utilized to serve all members here at the organization, excluding, of course, those students from the School of Pharmacy and our patients. So overwhelmingly, over 90% of people who visit the Ombuds are women, and less than 10% are men. It is important to note that I allow the visitors to select their own gender, just to make sure I get this information correct. Visitor type, our faculty make up 33%, staff make up 40%, and then students comprise 27% of the visitors. So over 70% of the visitors are employees here. The visits are held in my office unless a visitor requests that we meet at another location, whether that's on or off campus, or some may even request a WebEx meeting instead. Ombuds office stats. So visitors also select what brings you in today. They are able to select more than one reason to come. The most common reason someone chooses to see an ombuds includes they don't know how to proceed, they feel unfairly or insensitively treated, and they want to avoid the escalation of conflict. There's also this other category here. So if there is a reason that a visitor comes and it's not reflected in these categories, they have the opportunity to share what brings them in. And so some other common reasons that people choose to visit an ombuds include they want to update the ombuds on an existing issue. There are times where the visit has concluded and I don't know what path the visitor will take. And they will say, well, can we come back and let you know? Can we schedule another meeting? Absolutely. Some come in requesting mediation. They already know that they want a conversation mediated between them and another employee or want that service for employees in their area. Reviewing correspondence, which could include an appeal or correspondence to a supervisor, manager, or leader. They want a thought partner. Supervisors will come in and say, hey, I'm noticing this conflict in this area. This is my take and my perception on what's going on, but I want a third party of somebody who's not involved at all to kind of give me some feedback. Perspective needed prior to using formal complaint channels. Employees sometimes have trepidations about using our formal complaint channels. And so they want to kind of talk through about what that process will look like, what's the best way to go as they consider using a formal complaint channel. And then the last reason and other is colleague referral. So it is important for me to share that you can always refer that someone visit the Ombuds, but the person does not have to come. Using an Ombuds is a voluntary service. Likewise, if you encourage someone to visit the Ombuds and you ask me, hey, Erin, did such and such come? I can neither confirm or deny if the visitor has come to the office. The categories of concern. So the International Ombuds Association has said that any sort of complaint or concern, whether it's about work, school, etc., falls into one of these 9 categories. And they are right. I have not seen a complaint or concern that has fallen outside of these. The first one is compensation and benefits. So these are concerns that have to do with compensation, benefits, retirement, and pension. Evaluative relationship. These are concerns between people with power differentials like supervisors, supervisees, student, faculty, etc. These concerns can be related to respect, communication, feedback, violence, performance, departmental climate, discipline, or equity of treatment. It is important to note that evaluative relationships, out of all of the concerns up here, have more subcategories than any of them. So there are 19 subcategories that fall under evaluative relationship. Peer and colleague relationships are similar to evaluative relationship, except the concerns are with people that don't have a supervisory or student-professor relationship. Career progression, this has to deal with tenure, career progression, rotation of assignment, resignation, termination, or position elimination. Legal, regulatory, financial compliance. This has to deal with our business and financial practices, harassment, discrimination, disability, temporary or permanent reasonable accommodation. Safety, health, and physical environment. This has to deal with our physical working conditions, office ergonomics, cleanliness, and security. Service and administration areas. This is how well services are provided, our responsiveness and timeliness in office response, and the interpretation and application of our rules. Organizational, strategic, and mission related. These have to deal with questions that relate to the whole or some part of an organization that includes leadership, use of power, organizational climate, priority setting, and funding. Values and ethics and standards. These are questions and concerns about the fairness of our organizational values, ethics, or standards that govern why we do what we do, and the application of related policies and procedures. So, of course, the most common concerns really fall within that evaluative relationship and peer and colleague relationship. This is not a surprise to me. Typically, in most organizations that have an ombuds, most of the concerns have to do with the relationships with people that we engage with. So when we think about our relationships with our peers and our colleagues really drive our culture. Our culture is like a garden. If we leave it unattended, we are really inviting weeds and things that don't belong to kind of fester here. It is our responsibility as employees, regardless of the position that we hold, to water our garden because we need it to grow. Sometimes watering our garden is providing a safe space where people feel psychologically safe. Sometimes that means watering our garden means that we need to take an introspective look to consider how we do and what we do. As we consider fostering psychological safety, we should ensure that members feel safe enough to express their concerns without fears of retaliation and judgment. We do this by modeling good communication, being mindful of our tone, using respectful words and body language. At UMC, we often know that there are stressful events that occur. That causes our voices to sometimes be raised, that causes our tones and our body language to change, and that's okay. But after we come down from that stressful situation, we really have to go back and hit a reset to make sure that our environment is a safe space. So when we think about um, working and being at work, engaging with our colleagues, we are really hardwired for likability. We want to be liked by other people that we serve and other people that we connect with. Likability is how we learn and build connection. Conflict and disagreement is so difficult sometimes because it truly feels like a threat. Our bodies can't really differentiate between running from a bear and having an intense conflict. And so, under stress, we don't think clearly. We don't speak clearly. We are not our best selves because our bodies are really reserving the energy to run. Some people avoid dissension simply because it feels uncomfortable. But if we sweep that dissension under the rug, we are giving it permission to grow and thrive. My husband works for Ridgeland PD, and he was on the SWAT team at one point. And SWAT, they practice. They practice in rain, sleet, snow, all sorts of weather conditions, whether it's dark, whether it's light. He always says that he practices so much because he says, Aaron, in an intense situation, I'm going to fall back to my worst day of training. So if my worst day of training is a 95% or an 85%, that's what I'm going to give. So when we think about conflict, we're going to fall back to our worst, which is why we always have to do whatever we can, even when we're not in conflict, to really promote this psychological safety. I would even argue to say it's more important to create that psychological safety outside of moments of conflict, because once that conflict occurs, if people don't feel comfortable or safe kind of sharing their concern, they will just bottle it up. We also need to have that periodic check-in and really practice active listening among each other. We have to be insanely curious. As an ombuds, I'm insanely curious about why do we do that? Why did you do that? Tell me a little bit more about that. Deep listening is better than the best problem solving. Ombuds would say listening does more than litigation. If we don't do anything else, we should listen to the people that we serve and the people that we connect with. Listening does not mean that we agree. I hear lots of things I don't necessarily agree with. That is okay. When you listening, you are not saying I concede or I agree. You are simply giving the other party an opportunity to be deeply heard. If you are managing conflict as a manager, consider if you allow the other party to have their say, simply independent of yours. I'm a previous supervisor where I supervised tons of people, and listening really served me well. But as a supervisor, I listen differently than I do as an ombuds. As a supervisor, I listen to fix, I listen to justify, I listen to provide, additional context into why. And all those things are important, but we do need to give people the opportunity to share their story, and we should listen simply for the sake of listening. Listening serves to reduce kind of that emotional tension, clarifies misunderstanding, and builds trust and respect. One of the things I know about conflict is that it loves speed. And so when we listen, we can really slow it down and break that conflict down in manageable pieces. So here is a list of the Ombuds services that are provided. The most common service provided really are those developing options. When people come to an Ombuds, they're really looking for options because they really want some clarity. They want their situation to resolve. So we will talk through a multitude of options. Coaching is another big one that visitors want. So helping visitors really prepare for difficult conversations that they need to have. Providing a reality check. Sometimes visitors do not see the things as they are. sometimes there are misconceptions and bias that are leading why the visitor is engaging and having the thoughts that they have. And so just a polite reality check, and I think it really flows really well from someone who is truly an outsider versus maybe someone who was a little bit more closer to the situation. Because sometimes there are other services that are provided that were not initially included in this list. That includes a confidential ear and document review. There are some people who come to an ombuds who say, I'm not expecting you to solve this concern. I just want you to know that it is happening. And also referrals. So the most common offices that I refer visitors to are Human Resources, Compliance, and Office of Wellbeing. It's also important for me to share that the referral lies between me and the visitor at that moment. So I wouldn't refer someone to the Office of Wellbeing and then call and say, you know what? I just want to let you know I referred Erin Von Jones to you. So no, so it is incumbent upon the visitor to take that next step to the appropriate office that's going to handle their concern or formally address their concern, I should say. So some frequently asked questions: how does the Ombuds office differ from other offices that address community concerns? Really, it is the informality about this. The fact that the office, it truly is off the record. That really makes talking about conflicts and sensitive information a little bit easier for the visitor. The office also does not make administrative decisions, as I said earlier, create or amend policy, and does not have the authority to change disciplinary action. The office also does not provide legal advice. It is absolutely informal. Does using the Ombuds prevent me from filing a formal complaint? No. So the Ombuds office here at UMC was not created to replace anything. It was created to supplement and to provide an additional avenue for faculty, staff, residents, students, all of our groups here at UMC to really have a safe space. Likewise, when you visit an Ombuds, I don't know that you're in a formal complaint process unless that is something you share with me. There are visitors who typically will be open and share and say, hey, I've spoken with this office, or because of the severity of this situation, I'm thinking about, getting legal representation. That is all fine and dandy, but coming to an Ombuds will not impact any other formal process that you are in at UMC. Where can I find more information about the office and the role? If you scan this, it will take you to the page on the intranet that has more information about the Ombuds office. The best way to schedule with the Ombuds is to email ombuds@umc.edu. And then my office is located in the Holmes Learning Resource Center, U124-04. It is physically within the Office of Financial Aid. And so if you ever want me to speak to your group, I've done tons of presentations, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, etc. I'm happy to do that. But also, some faculty and staff have utilized me to present on various topics, whether it's emotional intelligence, conflict management. So I can provide and engage a group through an interactive exercise to learn more about something in particular. It will be specific and tailored to your office. My contact information is here, so my phone number, my email addresses. It is important for me to share. I don't create calendar invites. So if a visitor does want to come and schedule with me, the visitor either has to ask me to send them a calendar invite. Otherwise, while I block the time on my calendar, I don't ever want to do anything that could compromise that confidentiality and create an additional record. So if you all don't have any questions, I would love some feedback about this presentation. Thank you.